Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Compelling Conversations podcast. Today, I'm joined by my friend Mohammed. Mohammed, thanks so much for being here, man.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we were talking at River Oaks a couple weeks ago, and it just became a part of the conversation. We were talking about the Dajjal man,
Yeah.
and it
Yep.
was you were saying some very interesting things that I hadn't really heard before. You want
Yeah.
to begin by explaining who he is and what the things you were sharing were?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to do that to the best of my knowledge. Just want to clarify first. I'm not a sheikh. I'm not a subject matter expert. I'm just someone who do some research on the side. Like I'm a finance major. I do consulting for work. But I've read about it when I was a bit younger. So I know a little bit of information. The thing with the Dajjal, well, first, let me start by saying that the Dajjal is a concept that's in the Muslim tradition, but it also has existed in the Christian and the Jewish traditions as well. The Prophet ﷺ said that all the prophets have warned their nations about the Dajjal, and I will warn you about him too. So the Prophet had told us about the Dajjal. Now, in today's world, modern day Christians and Jews also believe in the Dajjal, but they call him different names, Antichrist, whatever, and they have different descriptions, or their story is a little bit different. But from the Muslim perspective, in the Sahih Muslim, so the authentic Hadith narration, we have few stories about him. So we have things that could possibly be true and things that are true 100%. One of them, a big suspect, is a man called Ibn Sayyad, and this man has actually was existed in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So this man, when he was a kid, actually at the time of the Prophet, and the Prophet heard that this kid is dealing with the jinn, with the devil, and he's like a fortune teller or a soothsayer, so he's able to tell you the future or what you're thinking. So the Prophet ﷺ, in one narration, he tries to like figure out who this kid is or who this human is. So he goes to him with the Umar ibn Khattab, his companion, and they were waiting. Um, they saw him playing with kids, and the Prophet was like going from tree to tree, and then the Prophet eventually came to him, and then Ibn Sayyad turned around. He was a kid like 12, 13 at the time, and then the Prophet asked him, "Do you believe that I am the Prophet of God?" Ibn Sayyad goes, "Do you believe that I'm the Prophet of God?" You know, that's just like this belief right there. That's kufr right there. This little kid is ridiculing the Prophet. Uh, um, and the Prophet ﷺ in a different narration says that there's going to be 30 Dajjals, so 30 liars. And then there's a big one, obviously, which is the one that we're talking about today. The 30
30
Dajjal,
Dajjals. That's
30
interesting.
Dajjals. Yep,
Dajjal,
yep.
by the way, it means deceiver. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. So 30 deceivers, false prophets, the Christians call them. We know the first one was Musaylim al-Kadhab. He was at the time of the Prophet.
But
Uh,
before you get to him, can you finish that story about Ibn Sayyad? I remember you telling me a little bit more about
yep,
that.
yep. No, yeah, there is more actually. So I'm going back to that story. Um, yeah, the kid was told the Prophet, "Do you believe I'm the Prophet of God?" So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has asked him. Um, he wanted to test him, so he's like, "Okay, I've hid something in my heart that I've told the Sahabas, the companions, you know, back there when he was obviously he was far. Do you know what that is?" And then so the kid was like, "Dukh, dukh." He's like trying to like it's two letters that he's trying to put together. And then the Prophet was like, "Khasit," which translates to shut up. Like he literally, the Prophet ﷺ wasn't too aggressive, but he aggressive with the people who deserve that, with liars, deceivers. So the Prophet. By the way, are you able to see me fine? I'm seeing some purple stuff on my screen. I
Yeah,
don't know.
maybe you can tilt it down a little or something. There you
Okay,
go.
All right, that's better.
The son. Yeah.
Yep. Sorry.
Yeah.
So yeah, just to continue with the story. So he said a dukh, and then the Prophet ﷺ asked him. Well, he told him, shut up. You will not go beyond that. And then later on, Amr ibn Khattab asked the Prophet, what was that? You know, the Prophet ﷺ said that this is the Surah Al-Dukhan. It's a chapter in the Quran, and the
Wow.
verses have been revealed to the Prophet.
Yeah, that story is wild. It's
Yeah.
wild. And you said that that kid, he also grew up, right? And he lived in that society.
Yes. So we actually do know a little more about the kid. We know that he was from a Jewish tribe, so he was a Muslim at the time of the Prophet. Later on, when the Prophet ﷺ has passed away, this man becomes Muslim, right? But he still seems very suspicious. You know, people were still skeptic about him in that society. You know, but he was Muslim. He lived in Medina. He lived in Mecca, and um, there was a battle. There was a time when I think it was a battle, and then the Sahabas were outside, okay, and no one was trying to talk to this man. You know, generally the Sahabas avoided this. But at that specific time, no one sat next to him, right? And they were distributing food. This man did not get his share because no one wanted to interact with him. So he goes and he sits next to one of the famous Sahabas, okay, and he talks to him. He's like, "Can I share, the food that you have?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure." Then this man Ibn Sayyad had a cup of milk, and he
Hit a
tried to
what?
offer a cup of milk.
A cup of
Milk,
milk.
yeah.
Okay.
And at that time, no one milk was like it was like a solid um, food. You know, like they considered milk. It wasn't just a drink. It was like food. It was, you know. At that time, he offered it to the Sahaba. So it was a big thing. You know, no one rejected the milk at the time. It was a big deal. But the Sahabi did reject that offer. You know, and he just gave him a silly excuse. He's like, "Oh, that milk is warm, too warm for me. I don't want to drink it." You know, it's a silly
Oh.
excuse, but really, he said later on, the Sahaba says, "I gave him the excuse. I don't want to take anything from that. I don't want to touch anything that he touched."
Hmm.
So it's pretty interesting. So, and then the man felt it, and then he told the Sahabi, he told the companion, he's like, "See, everyone has been trying to avoid me. You're trying to avoid me. You guys are treating me like a kafir, a non-believer. I'm a Muslim, you know. Everyone is saying I'm the Dajjal. The Prophet clearly said that the Dajjal will not enter Mecca and Medina. And here I am in Mecca and Medina. The Prophet said that I won't have kids, and I have a lot of kids. The Prophet said that the Dajjal won't be a Muslim, and I am a Muslim." So he was trying to convince this man. He was trying to convince his companion. And the companion, he's like, okay, I begin to have a soft spot for the dude. Like he mentioned all these things, he could be right. So he's about to like, he's felt sorry for him. And then out of nowhere, this Ibn Sayyad man goes and says, but I know who Ad-Dajjal is. I know where he was born. I know who his parents are. And basically, like, I know where he is at right where he's at right now.
Hmm.
Completely destroys everything that he's built. Completely like just throws us off. And then
Yeah.
the companion just like stood up and he's like, may God curse you, and just walked away and never ever talked
Really
to that man again. Yeah.
interesting. And that's just like the cliffhanger of the story. That's where the
There,
mystery remains,
there
or?
there's no there's actually one more story, or maybe not a story, but the last time that he was spotted,
Hmm.
right? That's the last thing that we know of the man, Ibn Sayyad. Is that he was fighting after the Prophet time, obviously. It was the time of Abu Bakr when he was a caliph. The Muslims were fighting the hypocrites at the time. No, one of them is Musaylim al-Kadhab, the man that I mentioned earlier. And then they're fighting him, and then they say that they all know that this man, Ibn Sa'ad, has participated in that battle. But after the battle, no one was able to find him amongst the dead or the alive. So, like, he wasn't found.
Interesting.
He was just
Wow.
gone. Yeah,
That is
that's the last thing we know about
interesting.
the man. Yeah. And then, so that's like a potential suspect of who Ad-Dajjal could have been. I think the scholars lean towards the opinion that he wasn't, even though you have big name companions that uh, they swear by Allah. Like Umar ibn Khattab used to swear by Allah that this was Ad-Dajjal, and his son used to swear by Allah too that this was Ad-Dajjal.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's very interesting.
And And this is
And
interesting. Yeah, I don't want
mhm.
to go ahead.
No, just one more thing, one like last fact about the man. A big twist is that his son actually became a scholar, like a well-known
Oh,
scholar of the time.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And I think it's very interesting that you shared this story with me because um, there's so much knowledge out there, but there's
yeah,
so much of it that we don't know. And like, I didn't know this. And in my head, it's always been like the Dajjal, the Antichrist, is just one man that
yeah,
comes at the end of times.
right,
But it's
right.
like, oh, apparently there's more deceivers out there, you
Yes,
know?
there's more deceivers. Obviously they're nowhere near his level, right? Like there are people who claim to be self prophecy, and there are big names that I can talk about, but that would raise a lot of controversies. So I'm not gonna bring it in this call. But there have been people who lived in our time. At least one person that, or maybe two that we know of that qualify to be within those 30 people. The Dajjal. Um, but yeah, but just talking about that last Dajjal, the main one, the Antichrist. So that's a potential suspect that we have, Ibn Sayyad. There's another story that's narrated that's also in Sahih, so it's also authentic, right? That I'm gonna mention, but and it's a common story, and I've been taught that when I was a kid. A lot of Muslims know about it. But the thing is that story raises a lot of questions, and maybe that's why it's been challenged. But just to kind of narrate the story, so the Prophet ﷺ was sitting right in Medina, and out of nowhere he calls upon everyone in the city to come to the mosque. He's like a salah jama, which is he uses that typically to call people to pray, but he also uses that to call people to the mosque whenever there's something serious. So he's like a salah jama, come to the mosque. They come to the mosque, right? They pray, and then after the prayer, he stands up, and he goes, "Everyone sit where you are. Don't get up. Don't move. I'm gonna tell you something." Right? And everyone is just listening. And he says, "I have with me a Sahabi. Well, it wasn't a Sahabi, a man. A man came to him. His name is Tamim. And he's like, he's gonna narrate something for you that I've told you before about the Dajjal." And then this man goes and tells him the narration. And then the narration is basically that this man is a Muslim now, but before he was a Christian, in his younger days, and he also was a sailor in the sea. So he would go out and to explore and stuff. And so one time we were in the sea, and it was just a bad weather. And there was a huge storm. We ended up getting lost. I was with a few other people, and we ended up at a random island, right? So we got off the boat, and the first thing that we see is a beast that comes to us, right? And this beast looks like we haven't seen it before. We don't know whether it's an animal or human, whatever, but it speaks. It spoke to them, right? It was scary. And then she told them, "There's a man that's been waiting for you guys to arrive. So come on and follow me." And then they follow the beast. Uh, they go inside. They see a man that's huge, very large, right? And he's all chained up, cannot move. Curly hair, and the dude speaks to them. Well, they ask him first, "Who are you?" And then the man goes, "Well, you're the one who came to me, so I have a right to ask you, who are you?" And then they tell them, "We're the people of Arabs. We're Christians. We were exploring the sea, and we just randomly ended up here. Who are you?" And then the man says he asked him 10 questions or so. I mean, I don't know the exact number, but basically he was asking them about random lakes, wells, lands. For example, the Lake of Tabariya, which is a lake in Palestine, northern Palestine. He asked him about it specifically. He's like, "How is that lake?" And they said, just fine. There's water in it, whatever. And he goes, "There's going to be a time, when this lake is going to dry up. There's going to be a time when this well is going to dry up. There's going to be a time when this green land is going to become like a desert, right?" So, and then so it's like 10 questions or so. And then at the end, he asked him, was there a prophet that come out to the Arabs?" And they go, "Yes." Then he said, "It would be better for the Arabs to follow that man." And soon enough, I will come out and I will roam the entire earth, and I'm the Antichrist. And then so they're frightened, they go back, whatever, time goes by, and then they tell the story to the prophet. The prophet, well, in that story, he also mentioned, I will roam the entire earth, but I will not be able to touch Mecca or Medina, just like I mentioned earlier. And then the narrator of the hadith says that the Prophet ﷺ, it goes like this. This is Taiba, this is Medina, this is the city that he's talking about. He won't be able to come in here, right? So, that's a second famous narration that's authentic, that's in the hadith, right? But you know, it's been challenged because they mention if that man was alive then he must be alive now. And we don't know of a man who's lived for that long, you know?
Yeah.
We don't know of a man who I think it kind of contradicts the description of the Prophet gave us of the Dajjal. I think he mentions that he was short. In the story, they said that he was a larger man. Um, and like so many other things that's been challenged, but nonetheless, it's there. He's a suspect also, I guess. But Ibn Sayyad and him are the two biggest stories, but they're also the two biggest controversies of the Dajjal.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. That's the most famous story that I've heard of Tamim ad-Dari. Yeah.
Yes.
And one of the things that I always thought was interesting about that one was the beast. The beast is, if I remember correctly, so hairy that you can't distinguish its front from its back. Not only
Exactly.
that, but when it speaks, it says, "My name is Jassasa," which, if
Jassasa.
I know correctly in Arabic, that means like spy, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, and that's just it's an interesting thing.
Yeah. And we know that Jassasa could. I think there are narrations that it will come out with him when he comes out towards the end of time.
Oh,
It will be with
interesting.
him. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that there is a beast from the earth that comes with the, if I'm not mistaken, staff of Moses and seal of Solomon, and it judges
Mm,
people.
yeah.
But um, going back to that same story, uh, I I've always seen like yeah, that's like the most famous story I've heard, and
Yep.
I guess that makes people wonder, is he really a man or is he like a particular creation just meant to come out at the end of
Yep.
times?
Yeah.
And you mentioned another one, Musaylama. Who is he? What is his story?
Musaylama al-Kadhdhab was a man who uh, claimed to be a prophet while the prophet was alive. It's very strange. This dude comes out, and I think they say that he was a man of a status in his society. So he was a well-known man. He was well educated. He was well spoken. When the prophet came out, this dude has a lot. He's got a lot of ego. He don't want to become Muslim, and then he tries to negotiate with the prophet multiple times. He's like, hey, listen, you're the prophet of the land. I'm the prophet of the sea. You take this group, I take that group. Yeah, he's trying to like, offer, to split the rule. And then the prophet, obviously, just like did not entertain any of these offers, right? Completely denied it. And then, but the thing is, this man actually had a lot of following, surprisingly. And even though he came up with false verses, like I think how in Quran we have a Surah Al-Fil. He he uh he came up with a Fil too, Surah, a different version. He's like Al-Fil
Hmm.
له خرطوم طويل. Al-Fil is an elephant,
Yeah.
right? And he talks about he's like, oh, elephant, he has a long trunk, he's scared of the flies, whatever. It's just silly, chapter, complete fabrication that he came up with. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think there's a narration where he comes and tells that to a man, and then the man goes, I think a Muslim, and then the Muslim tells him, or I don't know if you're Muslim or not, but the man tells him, like, that I know that you're lying. Like, we both know that this is completely BS. Who are you lying to? You know? But again, surprisingly, this dude had a lot of following. And then, so after the time of the Prophet, he had gathered a large army. And then there was a war. The first thing that Abu Bakr tackled, so Abu Bakr, during his time, during his caliphate, he could have flourished a lot, and he did. It's just that he was busy he just had that issue during his time that many people, hypocrites, and many people uh, uh, just turned away from Islam after the Prophet died. So he had to deal with that, and that was a huge issue. And there was something called Hurub al-Ridda,
What does that
against
mean?
the Hurub al-Ridda is the wars of people who have turned away from Islam. So he went to war with those people. One of them obviously was Musaylim al-Kadhab, and these wars were difficult. They were not easy. You know. So and during his time, he had sent armies to a lot of places, and he had sent an army to this man Musaylim al-Kadhab. You know, but they were struggling to defeat this man actually. But eventually, the legend Khalid ibn Walid, Abu Bakr has called him and sent him to Musaylim al-Kadhab to fight him. And then, interestingly enough, the man who killed Musaylim al-Kadhab is a man called Wahshi.
Oh,
It's the same companion that killed, and he wasn't companion at the time. He was a disbeliever. It's the same man who killed the uncle of the Prophet, Hamza, radiallahu
yeah,
anhu,
the lion. Yeah.
the lion of Islam. So he killed him, and I don't know if you know that story, but I can
Yeah,
say
I
it
know that
if you want
story,
me to
but
tell it.
yeah, yeah. Feel free to share it if you want. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, that it was during the battle of, I think, Uhud, either Badr or Uhud. I think Uhud maybe.
Yeah, I
Could
think
be
it was
wrong.
a hood. Yeah.
This man Wahshi, he was, I think, a slave. He didn't want to participate, and he narrates that himself. He said, "I was made an offer just to kill Hamza, because Hamza, he was such a strong man, a lion of Allah, and he was fighting a lot, and he had a huge impact in the battle. He was, a lot of people that he was able to fight at the same time." And then this man Wahshi said that I got paid just to kill Hamza. So I threw a spear at him. That was my main focus in the whole battle. I kept watching him the whole time. And I threw a spear at him, and I killed him. And then later on, he becomes a Muslim, this man Wahshi, and he goes and tries to apologize and ask for forgiveness from the Prophet. The Prophet tells him, obviously the Prophet is, if the man has asked for repentance, the Prophet is not going to say no, right? Allah forgives everything. So the Prophet told him to basically that Allah will forgive, just like repent. But the Prophet tells him, "I can't look in your face," and
Too sad.
you know,
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard, and it's fair. Even though he's the Prophet of Allah, but he's also a human, and his uncle was very beloved to him, and
Yeah.
that man has killed him. But anyway, what she says that my whole life, I've prayed to Allah that Allah would. I've killed such a legend Sahaba, so I want to kill someone who's you know,
Such
big
a
in the
villain.
non-Muslim. Yeah, such a villain,
Yeah.
a big villain, right? So,
Yeah.
subhanAllah, Allah give him that honor to kill himself.
Yeah. That's interesting. And I'm glad you shared that story actually because it kind I think really the most interesting thing about just studying the history of the Muslims is you see over and over and over again how all these people have the capacity to change, the potential to change, the ability to change. And when they do change, they become the best of people.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. Many stories. That Umar bin Khattab also has talked a lot about the Prophet and Muslims, and he was actually very harsh against the Muslims. That when he was about to become a Muslim, the one lady that was she actually interacted with him, and then she was going away to Abyssinia, which is in Africa. And that was the time when Muslims were facing a lot of hardships in Mecca. They were going away. They were gone away. And then she came across Umar bin Khattab, and then Umar bin Khattab asked her, "Where are you going?" And she's like, "Well, we're emigrating because you guys are giving us such a hard time." And then Umar goes, May God be with you." And then she was like, "Oh, that was a strange comment." She goes back, and I think it was her husband that she was talking to. She tells him, "I think there's hope that Umar bin Khattab will become Muslim."
Yeah.
That,
Uh,
I'm
yeah,
sure you
yeah.
know the story. He laughs. He's like, "I think that his donkey will become a Muslim before he does."
Yes, and I'm so glad that you mentioned this example because I've met people and they're like, I've given hope about that person, becoming a Muslim or changing or improving or whatever. And I always take it back to that story where it's like,
Always.
yeah, it'd be the donkey before him, but it's like, you know what I mean? It's such a
You
powerful
never
story that
know.
you never know. You can never
Yeah.
lose hope in people like that.
Yeah. And you'll find it like a lot of people that a lot of converts or reverts that what we call in Islam. There a lot of them are people who were strong believers, strong Jews, strong Christians. We have pastors that is very a common phenomenon that pastors become Muslim. It's very common too that many people who oppose Islam become Muslim too. We have the man who wanted to was I think the author of the movie that was made to uh, just display the prophet in an ugly manner. I think that man became a Muslim too. I don't know his name, but basically he wanted to learn about the prophet so that so he can make that movie. And he learned about it. And he's like, man, this man is awesome, you know. And then he became Muslim after that. He read the Quran, he read about the prophet, he became Muslim, and it's very, it happens a lot. You see it a lot. People who oppose Islam, they're like, okay, whatever, you say this. I'm gonna read the Quran, and then they go read the Quran, they become Muslim.
Yeah.
So it's just like going
Because,
back to what you said earlier. Never, lose hope on anybody. Anyone can
yeah,
read this.
everyone takes their time, you know? And I'm glad that you mentioned the Quran. Is there any verse in there in particular these days that you think about and it's something that's always running in your mind that gives you hope or something?
Um, there's a verse. It doesn't like, I'm sure there's a lot of verses that give you like hope in people. A lot of verses that talk about God's forgiveness. But there's one verse that stuck with me that gives me comfort whenever I deal with those people that talk about Islam in a bad manner. And I don't want to like quote. I'm gonna just say it in English. I don't want to quote in Arabic because I don't know the full verse. But basically, it's saying that God knows what they're saying, and it know that it hurts you in your chest. You know what I mean? So just be amongst the patient. That just give me a lot of hope. Anytime I see those people online, the ignorant people, that just talk about Islam without having, without reading anything, without reading the Quran or reading the story, the seerah of the Prophet, and they just hear the media and they talk bad. And sometimes I do dawah too. I go out and do dawah. And then, when I come across these people, some people are very nice and educated and they just want to learn. And some people are just, they just want to hate. And then it just annoys you. But then I go back to that verse and it's like, okay, God knows, you know. And those people have always existed, always. During the time of the prophet, before him, the other prophets, those type of people have always existed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they always have. Yeah, for all the prophets, eh?
Yep.
Man, it's
Yeah.
very interesting. It's very interesting. One thing that just came to my mind right now, speaking about patience and whatnot, I never understood the story of Musa, Prophet Moses and Khidr. I never understood that story. It was always a strange story to me. Anytime I heard it, I was like, "What? Like, this is." I didn't see the wisdom in it.
Hmm.
But then, like, I remember I was driving to school one day, and I was listening to Noman Ali Khan talk about it in a khutbah, and I was like, "Okay, like this is interesting." What he said about it. And then I spend my whole day at school, and then I'm driving back home, and it suddenly clicks. I realize, oh wow, this story makes sense now. And
Yep.
essentially, what Noman Ali Khan was saying was, you can be so kind to people, and you can try to be so patient and whatnot, but um, they might wrong you, and you don't understand why. But there's beauty in that because what's not apparent there God is aware of what is apparent and what isn't apparent. So
Right.
even though you might think something that's happening to you is bad, it's just for something else in the future. As we see in that
100%.
story, as Khidr makes the
Yep.
hole in the ship, right?
Yes.
These people let him take passage. He makes a hole in the ship. And Moses is like, hey, what are you doing? And then later on, he explains to them, hey, there was a king. He was going to seize that ship. So I made the hole so it would be defective. These people could keep their ship at least and repair it later. That's just like one example.
Right.
And yeah, that story it hits me a lot too. That you
Yeah.
just things happen, you don't know why, but there's a reason.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I don't know if you know, but there's a verse in the Quran that talks about that, It says, "Asa an takrahu shay'an wa huwa khayrun lakum." You know, that you would think something is bad for you, that it's actually good, is actually good in it for you, And sometimes it's the opposite too. But really, just Just think of it this way: everything that Allah has decreed for you is good. Everything, everything. So even you come in your life, there are going to be hardships for sure. Allah Subhanahu wa Taala also says in the Quran that do the believers think that they will believe and we will not test them? It's in the Quran, you know. And they say that the people that are closest to Allah, they get tested the most. The Prophet ﷺ buried all his children except one, Fatima, all of them. So yes, there is going to be a test. There is going to be something that might seem you know bad to you, but in reality, it's good. And you might not know. Maybe in the future you'll know. Sometimes you will never know. Maybe Yawm al-Qiyamah. That's why the day of judgment is the day of truth.
Yeah.
Allah will tell you everything.
Yes, I love that you said that. Sometimes you never know because I remember my grandmother, she visited from Pakistan. And, when my mom was 2, her father passed away. So I asked my grandmother, what do you think that was about? Like, why did that happen? What do you think? Did you get any meaning from that? Was there any closure in that? And she just looked at me and she's like, I don't know. I don't know. Like, after all these years. And it was interesting that she said that, because it was like, I, I can I can try to empathize with that perspective. But then I thought about it and I was like, but I kind of see why that happened. Maybe not the whole thing, but it's like if that didn't happen, maybe I wouldn't be here, you know?
Mm,
Maybe like the whole story of my mom would be a very different story.
yep,
So it's like sometimes things happen to you and you don't know why they happen to you necessarily, but perhaps it's just to create a path for
yep. No,
someone else's
100%.
life.
And I promise you this: everyone or anyone that you meet has a story similar in their life. Maybe not that. Maybe it's not this. But it's same theme where something bad that happened to them in their life. They didn't know what it was, but later on, just became clear to them that this thing happened for a reason. Just to give you an example, my mom, similar situation. I'm Palestinian, but my family, my mom and her mom, they live in Syria. My grandmother died in like right before, was it '09 or something? And she died young in her 60s, and it was my mom was very troubled by that. And my mom is a very sensitive person, very emotional. But later on in life, after the Syrian war happened, she's like, thank God. Her mom, my grandma, was living alone in Syria. And she's like, had she lived through the war, it would have been such a hardship because she's living alone and she's old, she can't take care of herself. And then my mom didn't want her grandma to see those days. It's such a horrifying days. She didn't want it because you ask anybody in Syria who lived during the war, you know, just it's very they're all fearful. It's horror everywhere. They hear bombs at night, in the morning, anytime. They all have trauma. So my mom didn't want her mom to go through that. So that happened for a reason. Alhamdulillah, there's time for everything.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. There's
Yeah,
definitely wisdom
100%.
there. I,
100%.
I had a lot of fun having you on here, and I'm curious.
Yeah.
Do you have any closing thoughts, man? Anything you felt like you wanted to say but didn't get a chance to? Something on your mind that you wanted to express?
I'll just end this with one thing, and really, I would have loved for us to like talk longer, but sorry, like this is like a working day, and I'm sure you're busy, and I've got meetings and stuff. But just to close off, just trust in God's plan. You know, there's always something. You always have a plan, but just know that God's plan is better, and you might not see it now, but you'll see it later.
Yeah. Thanks for saying
So
that.
yeah, I just felt like I want to close with that.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I think that's perfect. That's beautiful. I just
Yeah,
wanted
no
to say
problem.
one more thing, which was I think it's so funny that just about our entire lives we've been going to the same mosque and we didn't even know it. You know? I didn't
Well,
meet you at another mosque.
to be fair, not our entire life, because I actually moved to the Cyprus area about a year and a half ago. So
Oh,
prior to
okay, never
that,
mind.
yeah,
Never
yeah, okay, yeah, yeah.
mind.
So prior to that, I lived in Memorial. So I went
Oh,
to a different
wow.
mosque.
Were
Yep,
you a Farouk guy?
I was a Fur guy.
Nice.
Yep,
That's a
yep.
great
For a long
place.
time,
Yeah.
for like 8 years. Yep.
Wow.
Farouk
Awesome.
is such an iconic mosque, man.
It
like the OG
is.
mosque, you know?
It gives me the very Arab vibe when I walk in
It
it,
does.
you
It
know?
does.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say it's the most Arab mosque in Houston. That and Mascati for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But even though I feel like that's not a good thing to say, like an Arab mosque or, a Desi mosque. We're all Muslims, and mosques are for everybody.
Yeah. They welcome everyone. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. Yeah.
Well, Mohammed, thanks again for being here, man. I appreciate
Yeah, of
this. Until
course.
next
Thanks for
time,
having
man.
me. For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Inshallah, yeah.
Inshallah.